the dado in exactly the right position. Now the router tends to kick up a lot of dust, so I'm going to put on my dust mask and goggles. And since it's pretty loud, I'm also going to use some ear protection. I want to make sure that I start the router seated into position, okay? But I don't want to ever start it with the bit up against the board. So I'm going to start it out like so. We get to cut our radius curves now. We'll cut them on both ends, and then we come back and drill our holes for the towel rods. Now to make our radius curves, you can use anything that you have handy. I use this roll of tape right here, a coffee can, paint can, whatever. To make the cut, we're using a jigsaw. A jigsaw is a lot of fun because you can make all different kinds of curves. So I'm going to start right here.
Well, we've got all the parts cut out for our bathroom rack, and we're ready to assemble it. Before we do that, though, everything's been sanded, so everything's ready to go, and I've dry fit everything together. I want to see if all the parts that I cut out really fit together, and we've determined that they fit perfectly. So now we're ready to assemble it, and we're going to do that with carpenter's glue and small finishing nails. So I think we're ready to go. Avian, can you give me a hand with this?
Yeah, I'm bringing all this stuff to the party.
Okay, let's take it apart and go.
Well, this towel rack sure went together fast. Now all we need to do is sand it and put our finish on it. As for the audio rack, it's constructed in exactly the same way. The only difference is the sides are dadoed with a 45-degree dado, and then the shelves are beveled at a 45-degree angle, so that when the whole unit goes together, the sides and the shelves are going to be nice and flush.
We're all set to make the bevel cut on our shelf. It might look a little complicated, but it's really pretty easy. What we've done is tilt the table of our table saw over to 45 degrees, and that's going to make the exact angle we want here. Now, if your table saw has a tilting blade, you'd tilt it to 45 degrees. And if you don't have a table saw at all, you can use a circular saw by tilting the base of the circular saw to 45 degrees, clamping a straight edge on here, and making your cut that way. Now, the other thing I've done to make this cut accurate is I've used the stock as a guide to set the rip fence. Now, the plans tell me exactly how wide this board is, and if I set the rip fence right here, then I know that my bevel is going to come out exactly in the right place. Now we're all set to go. If you don't have a table saw, it's easy to make this angle dado cut using your router. You simply clamp a straight edge at 45 degrees on the board, make the cut, and you've got it. We're going to use the table saw, and to set that up, use your miter gauge, put this extension on it, have the miter gauge set at 45 degrees, and with this extension, you put a little stop block down here so that both sides, the cut will be in exactly the same place. That's all there is to it.
Hey, how'd you make out?
It looks marvelous.
Shall we dry fit it just to make sure?
Absolutely.
Now, after we dry fit it, we'll glue it, clamp it, and nail it just like we did for the towel rack.
Well, we've finished our bathroom rack and our audio cassette rack. What do you think we ought to do next?
Well, we're moving on to a couple of other small projects. We have this cute little jewelry box right here, and then a butcher block cutting board.
This box is a lot of fun to make. It's kind of a trick because it's cut out of one solid piece of wood on the bandsaw, including this little drawer. We're going to show you that trick in a minute.
Yeah, it's really neat. You know, you could buy a butcher block for $8 or $10, and it'll probably cost $2 or $3 to build one like this.
Yeah.
But I know when I build something for myself, I get tremendous rewards and satisfaction every time I use it. I always remember it, and I think about it, and I look at it, and It feels good.
Yeah, the point about doing things yourself isn't really all the time saving money. It's doing it yourself and getting the pleasure out of using it.
Besides that, it's really fun to make.
Yeah, let's show the folks how to cut this out and put it together.
Good. Now I'm cutting the stock for the butcher block. The thickness that you cut your stock is really going to determine the thickness of your cutting block. Now also notice here that I've cut the boards a little bit longer than the finished length of the cutting board. That's because when we laminate it, often you get a roughness in the edges, so that once everything has been glued and dried, we'll come back and square those ends off and they'll be nice and clean. Okay, now once I finish cutting my stock, we're going to go up and laminate the sides together. We'll be putting waterproof resorcinol glue on the edges and gluing it and clamping it together nice and tight. And we're using resorcinol so that in case the cutting block were ever left in water overnight or something, it's not going to come apart. I'm ready to take the butcher block out of the clamps. It's dried overnight so that it's nice and tight. So the next step is to surface the top and the bottom, and to do that I'm going to use a belt sander. Then once that's done, I need to square up the edges using a circular saw like this one, and then we want to round these edges off, and I'm going to use a router to do that. Now if you have some stationary power tools, you could use a table saw, planer, and a shaper. So what I'm going to do with this right now is I'm going to move this into this clamp here and clamp it down so it's going to be steady. Move the belt sander over. Now since this is pretty rough right now, I'm going to start by running the belt sander at a diagonal, and then once I get the really rough edges down, then I'll start sanding with the grain.
One of my favorite things to do in the shop is turn a pile of scrap like this into a cute little project like this box we showed you earlier. This really started as a pile of scrap, and you can use any kind of wood you want. In this case, we're using pine, and we simply alternate the layers so that the